All right, everyone, it's time for part two of Beowulf. So, in our last episode, we met King Hrothgar, who built a great mead hall or castle called Harrod Hall. And now we're going to meet one of the antagonists of the story, our friend Grendel. So, let's get started. Part two, Grendel attacks Harrod. And then a powerful demon, a prowler through the dark, nursed a hard grievance. It harrowed him to hear the din of the loud banquet. Every day in the hall, the harp being struck, and the clear song of a skilled poet telling the mastery of man's beginnings and how the Almighty had made the earth a gleaming plain girdled with waters. In his splendor, he set the sun and the moon to be the earth's lamplight, lanterns for men, and filled the broad lap of the world with branches and leaves and quickened life and every other thing that moved. So, times were pleasant for the people there until finally one, a fiend out of hell, began to work his evil in the world. Grendel was the name of this grim demon, haunting the marches, marauding around the heath and the desolate fens. He had dwelt for a time in misery among the banished monsters, Cain's clan, whom the Creator had outlawed and condemned as outcasts. For the killing of Abel, the eternal Lord had exacted a price. Cain got no good from committing that murder because the Almighty made him anathema, and out of the curse of this exile there sprang ogres and elves and evil phantoms and the giants too, who strove with God time and again until he gave them their reward. So after nightfall, Grendel set out for the lofty house to see how the Ringdanes were settling into it after their drink. And there he came upon them, a company of the best, asleep from their feasting, insensible to pain and human sorrow. And suddenly then, the god-cursed brute was creating havoc. Greedy and grim, he grabbed 30 men from their resting places and rushed to his lair, and flushed up in flame from the raid, blundering back with the butchered corpses. And then as dawn brightened and the day broke, Grendel's powers of destruction were plain. Their wassail was over. They wept to heaven and mourned under mourning. Their mighty prince, their storied leader, sat stricken and helpless, humiliated by the loss of his guard, bewildered and stunned, staring aghast at the demon's trail in deep distress. He was numb with grief, but got no respite, for one night later, merciless Grendel struck again with more gruesome murders. Malignant by nature, he never showed remorse. It was easy then to meet a man shifting himself to a safer distance to bed in the bothies, for who could be blind to the evidence of his eyes, the obviousness of that hall watcher's hate? Whoever escaped kept a weather eye open and moved away. So Grendel ruled in defiance of right, one against all, until the greatest house in the world stood empty, a deserted wallstead. For 12 winters, seasons of woe, the Lord of Shielding suffered under his load of sorrow. And so before long, the news was known over the whole world. Sad lays were sung about the beset king, the vicious raids and ravages of Grendel, his long and unrelenting feud, nothing but war. How could he never parley or make peace with any Dane, nor stop his death-dealing, nor pay the death price? No counselor could ever expect fair reparation from those rabid hands. All were endangered. Young and old were hunted down by that dark death shadow who lurked and swooped in the long nights of the misty moors, and nobody knows where these reavers from hell roam on their errands. So Grendel waged his lonely war, inflicting constant cruelties upon the people, atrocious hurt. He took over Harrod, haunted the glittering hall after dark, but the throne itself The treasure seat was kept from approaching because he was the Lord's outcast. And these were hard times, heartbreaking for the Prince of the Shieldings. Powerful counselors, the highest in the land, would lend advice, plotting how best the bold defenders might resist and beat off sudden attacks. And sometimes at pagan shrines they vowed offerings to idols and swore oaths that the killer of souls might come to their aid and save the people. And that was their way, their heathenish hope. Deep in their hearts they remembered hell. And the almighty judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, head of the heavens and high king of the world, was unknown to them. Oh, cursed is he who in times of trouble has to thrust his soul in the fire's embrace for feeding help. He has nowhere to turn. But blessed is he who after death can approach the Lord and find friendship in the Father's embrace. And so that trouble continued, woe that never stopped, steady affliction for Halfdane's son, too hard an ordeal. And there was panic after dark, and people endured raids in the night, riven by the terror. When he heard about Grendel, Hygelac's Thane was on home ground over in Geatland, and there was no one else like him alive. And in his day, he was the mightiest man on earth, high-born and powerful. He ordered a boat that would ply the waves, and he announced his plan to sail the Swan's Road and search out that king, the famous prince who needed defenders. And nobody tried to keep him from going. No elder denied him, dear as he was to them. Instead, they inspected omens and spurred his ambition to go, whilst he moved about like the leader he was, enlisting men the best he could find with 14 others. The warrior boated the boat as captain, a canny pilot along coast and currents. So that's part two. So in part two, a lot of important things just happened. One, Grendel shows up. And I almost like to think of Grendel as the Grinch who stole Christmas, kind of, listening to the parties in Harrowit Hall, just being like, I must stop Christmas from coming. But instead of stealing presents, he decides to invade the castle and eat people. So Grendel is just like killing everybody. And, King Hrothgar, who descends from all these Danes, is supposed to be so powerful, but he's just all like, let me look at this picture of King Hrothgar. He's all like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm a famous warrior, but I can't kill Grendel. And word spreads throughout Scandinavia that Hrothgar is just in trouble. So at the end there, we heard about Hygelac's Thane, which is another word for like a baron or, a warrior knight. So at the end we get to meet Beowulf, and he hears this story about Grendel attacking Harrowit Hall, and he's going to go over there and he's going to save the day. So Beowulf here is our epic hero, and we're going to see in the next sections as he arrives in Denmark that he's going to try to save the day because he's Beowulf and he's the mightiest warrior who ever lived, and he's going to save the king. Will he save the king? That's the question. The other important thing in this section, which, if you remember my lecture about the illusions in the play, you probably noticed there was this whole thing about Grendel being descended from Cain. And if you know the story of Cain and Abel from the book of Genesis, Cain killed his brother Abel and was cursed by God for the first murder that humans ever committed. And he curses Cain to wander through the earth, suffering for all of eternity. And Grendel is one of Cain's descendants. So from Cain's murder came all this evil pagan influence and all these evil monsters and ogres and elves and witches and magic. And Grendel is one of those evil things. So as you see, there's this tension between Christianity and paganism starting to arise, right? Like Grendel is the pagan world, that evil world of Cain and murderers and magic. And then there's Hrothgar and Beowulf, who represent God because they're going to be the light of God and save Christianity for all and save Europe from the evil pagans. So next part, we will meet Beowulf officially, because he's going to arrive in Harrod Hall and he's going to get ready to do battle with the evil monster Grendel. So I'll see you in part 3.